World of Warcraft The Last Guardian by Jeff Grubb. Chapter 10 The Emissary. With Medivh's recovery, things returned to normal, or as normal as anything was in this presence of the Magus. When the Magus was absent, Khadgar was left with instructions as to honing his magical skills. And when Medivh was a resident in the tower, the younger mage was expected to demonstrate those skills at the drop of a hat. Khadgar adapted well, and felt as if his power was a set of clothes, 2 sizes too big, that only now he was growing into. He could control fire at will now, summon lightning without a cloud in the sky, and cause small items to dance upon the table at will of his own mind. He learned other spells as well, those that allowed one to know when and how a man died from a single bone of his remains, how to cause a ground fog to rise, and how to leave magical messages for others to find. He learned how to restore the age lost to an inanimate object, strengthening an old chair, and its reverse, to pull all the youth from a newly crafted club, leaving it dusty and brittle. He learned the nature of protective wards, and was entrusted with keeping them intact. He learned the library of demons through Medivh would not permit any to be summoned within his tower. The last order Khadgar had no desire to break. Medivh was gone for brief periods of a day here, a few days there. Always instructions were left behind, but never explanations. Upon his return, the Guardian looked more haggard and worn, and would push Khadgar testily to determine the youth's mastery over his craft, and to detail any news that had arrived in his absence. But there was no further repeat of his comatose rests, and Khadgar assumed that whatever the master was doing did not involve demons. One evening in the library, Khadgar heard noises from the common area and the stables below, shouts, challenges, and responses in low, unintelligible tones. By the time he reached the window overlooking the part of the castle, a group of riders were leaving the tower's walls. Khadgar frowned. Were those some supplements turned away by Morose, or messengers with some other dark tidings for this master? Khadgar descended the tower to find out. He caught sight of the new arrival only briefly. A flash of black cloaks stepped into a guest room along the lower levels of the tower. Morose was there, candle in hand, binders in place, and as Khadgar slipped down to the last few steps, he could hear the Castaigne. Other visitors, they were less careful. They're gone now. Whatever response the new arrival made was lost, and Morose pulled the door shut as Khadgar came up. A guest? Asked the young man, trying to see if there was any clue of the new arrival behind him. Only a closed door greeted his view. Yep, replied the Castellan. Mage or merchant? Asked the young mage. Couldn't say, said the Castellan, already moving down the hall. Didn't ask, and the emissary didn't say. The emissary? Repeated Khadgar, thinking of that one of the mystery letters from Medivh's great sleep. So it's political, then, for the Magus. I assume so, said Morose. Did not ask. Not my place. So it is for the Magus, said Khadgar. Assume so, said Morose, with the same sleepy infection. If they'll be told when we need to know. With that, he was gone, leaving Khadgar to stare at a shut door. For the next day, there was the odd feeling of another presence in the tower. A new planetary body whose very gravity changed the orbits of all the others. This new planet caused Cook to shift to a larger set of pans, and Morose to move through the halls at more random times than normal, and even Medivh himself would send Khadgar on some errand within the tower. As the young mage left, he would hear the whisper of a heavy cloak on the stonework behind him. Medivh volunteered nothing, and Khadgar waited to be told. He dropped hints. He waited patiently. Instead, he was sent to the library to continue his studies and practice his spells. Kagar descended the curved stairs for a half rotation, stopped, then slowly climbed back up, only to see the back of the black cloak glide into the Guardian's laboratory. Kagar stomped down the stairs, considering options of who this emissary was. A spy for Lothar? Some secretive member of the Order? Perhaps one of the members of the Kirin Tor, the one with the spidery handwriting and venomous theories, or maybe some other matter entirely. Not knowing was frustrating, and not being trusted by the Magus seemed to make matters worse. "We'll be told when we need to know," Hagar muttered, stomping into the library. His notes and histories were scattered on the tables, where he'd left them last. He looked at them and the schematics of his vision summoning spell. He had made a few amendments since the last attempt, hoping to temporarily refine the results. Kagar looked at the notes and smiled. Then he picked up his vial of crushed gemstone and headed downward, putting additional floors between himself and Medivh's audience chamber, to one of the abandoned dining halls. 2 levels lower was perfect. An episodic room with stone fireplaces at each end, a great table put into service elsewhere, the ancient chairs lined across the wall from a single entrance. The floor was white marble, old and cracked, but kept clean by Morose's relentless industry and drive. Kagar laid out a magical circle of amethyst and rose quartz. Still grinning as he laid out the lines, he was confident of his casting now, did not need his ceremonial conjuration robes for luck. As he laid out the pattern of protection and abjuration, he smiled again. He was already sharpening the energy within his mind, calling the required shades and types of magic, confirming them into the requisite shape, holding the fertile energy in abundance until it was needed. He stepped within the circle, spoke the words that needed to be spoken, made the motions with his hands in perfect harmony, and unleashed the energy within his mind. He felt the release as something connected within his mind and soul, and he called the magic forth. "Show me what's happening in Medivh's quarters," he said, his mind giving off a nervous tick, hoping the Guardian's wards did not apply to his apprentice. Immediately he knew the spell had gone wrong. Not in a major fashion, with the magical milices collapsing upon themselves, but a slight misfire. Perhaps the wards did work against him, redirecting his vision elsewhere to another scene. He knew he was off by several clues. First off, it was now daylight. Second, it was warm. And last, the location was familiar. He had not been here before exactly, at least not in this particular spire, but it was clear it was Stormwind Keep, overlooking the city below. It was one of the taller spires, and the room was smaller in general design to that where the 2 members of the Order had met their end months earlier. Yet the windows were large and open to a great white parapet, and a warm, scented breeze stripped daffodilly draperies. Multicolored birds perched within the golden hoops around the perimeter of the room. Before Kagar, a small table was set with white porcelain plates edged with gold, and knives and forks of precious metal as well. Crystal bowls held fruit, fresh and unblemished, the morning dew still clinging to the damples of the strawberries. Kagar felt his stomach rumble slightly at the sight. Around the table hovered a thin man unknown to Kagar, narrow-faced and wide forehead, with a slender mustache and goatee. He was draped in ornate red quilt that Kagar realized must be a dressing gown, cinched at the waist with a golden belt. He touched one of the forks, moving it a muscle's length sideways, then nodded in satisfaction. He looked up at Kagar and smiled. "Ah, you're awake," he said in a voice that almost sounded familiar to Kagar as well. For an instant, Kagar thought that this vision could see him, but no. The man was addressing someone behind him. He turned to see Egwene, as youthful and beautiful as she had been on the snowfield. Was it earlier than that date? Later? He could not tell from her appearance. She wore a white cape with green lining. This was made of silk now, not fur, and her feet shod were showed not in boots but in simple white sandals. Her blonde hair was held in place with a silver diadem. "You seem to have gone to a great deal of trouble," she said, and her face was unreadable to Kagar. "With sufficient magic and desire, nothing is impossible," said the man, and turned over his hand palm upward, floating above his palm a white orchid bloomed. Egwene took the flower, raised it perfunctorily to her nose, then set it down at the table. "Nihilus," she began. "Breakfast first," said the mage. "Nihilus. See what a court conjurer may whip up first thing in the morning. These berries were picked from the royal gardens not more than an hour ago." "Nihilus," Egwene said again. "Followed by slices of butter-fed ham and syrup," continued the mage. "Nihilus. Then perhaps some eggs of the Varroka, poached at the table in the shell by a simple spell I learned out on the Isles," said the mage. "I am leaving," said Egwene simply. A cloud passed over the mage's face. "Leaving? So soon? Before breakfast? I thought we would have a chance to talk further." "I am leaving," said Egwene. "I have my own tasks to complete, and little time for the pleasantries of the morning afterward." The court conjurer still looked confused. "I thought that after last night you would want to remain in the castle at Stormwind for a while." He blinked at the woman. "Wouldn't you?" "No," said Egwene. "Indeed, after last night there is no need for me to remain at all. I've obtained what I have come here for. There is no need for me to stay any longer." In the present, Kagar winced as the pieces fell into place. "Of course," the mage's voice sounded familiar. "But I thought," stammered the mage, Nihilus. But the guardian shook her head. "You, Nihilus Aran, are an idiot," said Egwene simply. "You are the one of the mightiest sorcerers in the Order of Tirisfal, and yet you remain an idiot. That says something about the rest of the Order." Nihilus Aran brattled. He meant to look irritated, but only looked petulant. "Now wait a moment. Surely you did not think that your natural charm alone brought me to your chamber, nor that your wit and sense of whimsy distracted me from our discussion of conjuration rites. Surely you realize that I cannot be impressed by your position as court conjurer like some village cowherd would. And surely you must realize that seduction works both ways. You're not that big-headed, that big of an idiot, are you, Nihilus Aran?" "Of course not," said the court conjurer, clearly stung by her words but refusing to admit it. "I just thought that, like civilized people, we might share a moment of breakfast." Egwene smiled, and Kagar saw that it was a cruel smile. "I am as old as many dynasties, and I've gone over my girlish indulgences early in my first century. I knew fully what I was doing coming to your chambers last night." "I thought," said Nihilus, "I thought you struggled for the right words." "You thought of all of the Order would be the one to charm and tame the great wild guardian," said Egwene, the smile growing wider. "That you could break her to your will where all the others had failed. Through your charm and wit and parlor tricks. Harness the power of the Trisfalian. to your own chariot. Come now, Nihilus Loran. You have wasted much of your potential as it is. Do not tell me that the life of the royal court has corrupted you utterly. Leave me some respect for you. But if you are not impressed, said Nihilus, his mind wrapping around what Egwin was saying, if you wanted me, then why if you didn't want me, then why did we... Egwin provided the answer. I came to Stormwind for one thing I could not provide myself. A suitable father to my heir. Yes, Nihilus Aran. You can tell your fellow mages in the Order that you managed to bed the great and mighty Guardian. But you'll also have to tell him that you provided me with a way of passing on my powers without the Order having any further say in it. Did I? The result of his action began to sink in. I suppose I did. But the Order would not like to be manipulated, to be countered, to be fooled, said Egwin. No, they will not. But they will not act against you for fear that I truly do have some romantic interest in you. And take this solace. Of all the mages, wizards, conjurers, and sorcerers, you are the one with the most potential. Your seed will protect and strengthen my child and make him a vessel for my power. And when he is born and weaned, you will even raise him. Here, for I know he will follow my path, and even the Order would not want to miss that opportunity to influence him. Nihilus Aran shook his head. But I... He stopped for a moment. But did you... He stopped again. At last, when he spoke, there was finally some fire in his eyes and steel in his voice. Goodbye, Magna Egwin. With that, she turned on her heel and was gone from the room. Nihilus Aran, chief conjurer to the throne of Azeroth, conscriptor in the Order of Tirisfal, and now father to the future guardian Medivh, sat by the perfectly set table. He picked up a golden fork, turned it over and over in his fingers, then he sighed and dropped it on the floor. The vision faded before the fork struck the marble floor, but Khadgar was aware of another noise, this one behind him. The sound of a boot scraping against the cold stone, the soft scraping of a cloak. He was not alone. Khadgar wheeled, but all he caught was a tantalizing glimpse of a black cloak's back. The emissary was spying on him. Bad enough he was sent away each time Medivh met with the stranger. Now the emissary had run of the castle and was spying on him? At once, Khadgar was on his feet, rushing for the entrance. By the time he reached the doorway, his prey was gone, but there was a sound of fabric brushing along stone down the stairs. Down toward the guest quarters, Khadgar barreled forward down the stairs as well. The curve of the stairs would keep the emissary outside to the outside rim, where the footing was broader and more sure. The younger mage had raced up and down these steps so many times, he definitely danced down along the inner wall, skipping the stairs in twos and threes. Halfway to the guest level, Khadgar could see his prey's shadow against the outer wall. As he reached the guest level itself, he could see the cloaked figure moving swiftly through the archway and towards its door. Once the emissary reached the guest quarters, he would lose his chance. Khadgar vaulted the last 4 steps in a single bound and leapt forward, grasping the cloaked figure by the arm. His hand clenched on fabric and firm muscle, and he spun his prey towards the wall. The Magus will want to know you're spying, he began, but words died in his mouth as the cloak fell open to reveal the emissary. She was dressed in traveling leathers, with high-laced boots and black trousers, a black silk blouse. She was well-muscled, and Khadgar had no doubt she had ridden the entire way here, but her skin was green, and her hood fell back to reveal jutted jaw-fanged orcish face. Tall orcish green ears poked from the mass of ebony hair. "Orc!" shouted Khadgar, and reacted with an automatic response. He raised a hand, murmured a word of power, summoning the force to drive a bolt of mystic power through her. He never had the chance to finish. The first opening of his mouth, the orc woman lashed out with a roundhouse kick, bringing her leg up to chest level. Her knee brushed aside Kagar's pointing hand, forcing his aim off. Her boot foot slammed to the side of Kagar's chest, staggering him. Kagar reeled back and tasted blood. He must have bitten his cheek as a result of the blow. He raised his hand again to fire a bolt, but the orc was still too fast. Faster than the armor-bound warriors he had fought earlier. Already, she had closed the distance between them, driving a hard fist into his stomach, forcing the wind from his lungs and the concentration from his mind. The young mage snarled, abandoning magic for the moment in favor of a more direct approach. Still smarting from the blow, he spun to one side, grasping the woman's arm and pulling her off balance. A surprised look crossed the woman's jade-shade face, but for a moment she planted her feet firmly on the ground, pulled Kagar towards him, and neatly broke and reversed the hold. Kagar got a whiff of spices as he was drawn close to the orc, and then she threw him bodily down the hallway. He slid along the stone floor, bumped into the wall, and at last coming to rest at someone's feet. Looking up, Kagar saw the Castilian looking down at him, a look of vague concern on his face. "Morose!" shouted Kagar. "Get back! Fetch the magus! We have an orc in the tower!" Morose did not move, but instead looked up at the orcish woman with his bland, blinkered eyes. "Are you all right, emissary?" The woman smirked, her greenish lips tucked back, and wrapped her cloak around herself. "Never better. Needed a little exercise. The whelp was kind enough to oblige." "Morose!" spat the young mage. "This woman is—" "The emissary, a guest of the magus," said Morose, adding blandly, "Come to get you. Magus wants to see you." Kagar pulled himself to his feet and looked sharply at the emissary. "When you see the magus, you're going to tell him you were snooping around." "Doesn't want to see her," corrected Morose. "Wants to see you, apprentice." "She's an orc," said Kagar loudly and harsher than he meant to. "Half-orc, really," said Medivh. He was bent over his workbench, fiddling with golden device and an astrolabe. "I surmise her homeland was humans, or near humans, or at least had them within living memory. Hand me the clippers, apprentice." "They tried to kill you," shouted Kagar. "Orcs, you mean?" "Some did, true," said Medivh calmly. "Some orcs tried to kill me, and you as well. Grona wasn't in that group. I don't think she was, at any rate. She's here as a representative for her people, or at least some of her people." Grona. So the witch has a name, thought Khadgar. Instead he said, "We were attacked by orcs. I had a vision of attacking orcs. I had been reading the communications from all over Azeroth, speaking of raids and attacks by orcs. Every mention of orcs speaks of their cruelty and violence. There seems to be more of them every day. This is a dangerous and savage race." "And she dispatched you easily, I assume," said Medivh, looking up from his work. Despite himself, Kagar touched the corner of his mouth, where the blood had already dried. "That is completely besides the point." "Completely," said Medivh. "And your point would be?" "She is an orc. She is dangerous, and you have given her free reign of the tower?" Medivh grumbled, and there was steel to his voice. "She is a half-orc. She is about as dangerous as you are, given the situation and inclination. And she is my guest, and should be accorded with all the respect of a guest. I expect this from you regarding my guest, young trust." Kagar was silent for the moment and tried a new approach. "She is the emissary." "Yes." "Who is she the emissary for?" "One or more of the clans are currently inhabiting the Black Morass," said Medivh. I'm not quite sure which ones yet. We haven't gotten that far. Hagar blinked in surprise. You let her into our tower, and she has no official standing? Medivh laid down the clappers and gave out a weary sigh. She has presented herself to me as a representative of some of the Orc clans that are presently raiding Azeroth. If this matter is going to be solved by any matter other than fire and sword, then someone has to start talking. Here is a good place as any, and by the way, this is considered my tower, not ours. You are my student here, my apprentice, and are here at my whim. And as my student, as my apprentice, I expect you to keep an open mind. There was silence as Khadgar tried to let this sink in. So she represents whom? Some, none, or all of the orcs. She represents, for the moment, herself, said Medivh, laying out an irritated sigh. Not all humans believe the same thing. There is no reason to believe that all orcs do either. My question for you is, given your nature curiosity, why aren't you already trying to pull as much information out of her as possible instead of telling me I should not do the same? Unless you doubt me in my abilities to handle a single half-orc. Khadgar was silent, doubtfully embarrassed both for his actions and for failing to see another way. Was he doubting Medivh? Was there even a chance that the Magus would act in a fashion not to uphold his order? The thoughts churned within him, fueled by Lothar's words. The vision of the demon and the politics of the order. He wanted to warn the older man, but every word seemed to be turned against him. Every word seemed to be turned back against him. I worry about you sometimes, he said at last. And I worry about you as well, said the older mage, distractedly. I seem to worry about a lot of things these days. Khadgar had to make one last attempt. Sir, I think Garona is a spy, he said simply. I think she is here to learn as much as she can to use against you later. Medivh leaned back and gave the young man a wicked smile. That is very much the pot calling the kettle black, young mageling. Or have you forgotten the list of things your own masters of the Carantor wanted to wheedle out of me when you first got to Karazhan? Khadgar's ears were burning crimson as he left the room. Chapter 11. Garona. He returned to his, Medivh's, library, to find her going over his notes. An immediate rage blossomed in his chest, but the sting of her blows and Medivh's chastisement kept his anger in check. What are you doing? He said, still sharply. Emissary Garona's fingers danced up from the papers. Snooping, I believe you called it. Spying? She looked up, a frown on her face. Actually, I'm just trying to understand what you're doing here. It was left out in the open. I hope that's all right with you. It is not all right with me, thought Khadgar, but instead he said, Lord Medivh has instructed me to extend you every courtesy. However, he may take a barge, if, in doing so, I allow you to blow yourself up in casting some ill-thought magical spell. Garona's face was impassive, but Khadgar noted that she did lift her finger from the page. I have no interest in magic. Famous last words, said Khadgar. Is there something here I can help you with, or are you just snooping in general, seeing what you can come up with? I am told you have a tome on Azeroth's kings, she said. I would like to consult it. You can read? Asked Khadgar. It sounded harsher than he meant. Sorry, I meant to say, yes. Surprisingly, I can read, said Garona, quickly and offensively. I have picked up many talents over the years. Khadgar scowled. Second row, fourth shelf up, is a red-bound book with gold trim. Garona disappeared into the stacks, and Khadgar took the opportunity to gather up his notes from the table. He'd have to keep them elsewhere if the half-orc had free run of the place. At least it wasn't order correspondence. Even Medivh would have a fit if he turned over the Song of Aegwynn to her. His eyes went to the section where the scroll used as a key was kept. From where he had standing, it looked undisturbed. No need to cause a scene here, but he would probably have to move it as well. Garna returned with a massive tome in her hand and raised a heavy eyebrow at Khadgar, forming a question. Yes, that is the one, said the apprentice. Human languages are a bit wordy, she said, setting the tome down in an empty space that previously held Khadgar's notes. Only because we always have something to say, said Khadgar, trying to manage a smile. He wondered, did the orcs have books? Did they read at all? They had spellcasters, of course, but did that mean they have any real knowledge? I hope I wasn't too hard on you earlier in the hall. Her tone was glib, and Khadgar was sure that she would rather have seen him spit out a tooth. Probably this was what passed as an apology among the orcs. Never better, said Khadgar. I needed the exercise. Garona sat down and started poring through the text. Khadgar noticed that she moved her lips as she read. She had intermittently turned toward the back of the book, to the recent editions about King Lane's reign. Now, not that the immediate fire of combat, he could see that Garona was not the standard orc he had fought earlier. She was lean and well-muscled, unlike the lumpy, rough brutes he had battled in the caravan site. Her skin was smoother, almost human, and a lighter shade of green than the jade flesh of the orcs themselves. Her fangs were a bit smaller, her eyes were a bit larger, more expressive than the hard crimson orbs of the orc warriors. He wondered how much of this was from her human heritage, and how much was from being female. He wondered if any of the orcs he had fought earlier were female. It was not obvious, and he had no desire to check at the time. Indeed, without the green flesh and disfigured tusked face, and the hostile superior attitude, it might almost be attractive. Still, she was in his library, and going through his books, well, Medivh's library and Medivh's books, but the Magus had entrusted them to him. So you're an emissary, he said at last. He tried to keep his words light and conversational. I was told of your impending arrival. The half-orc nodded, concentrating on the words before her. Who are you an emissary for, exactly? Garona looked up, and Khadgar saw a flicker of irritation beneath her heavy brows. Khadgar felt good about bothering her, but at the same time wondered where the woman drew the line. He did not want to push too hard or too fast, lest he earn another beating or another curt dismissal by the Magus. At least this time he would get some information out before the battle. He said, I mean, you're the emissary. That means someone is giving you orders, someone is pulling your strings, someone you have to report back to, whom you do represent. I'm sure your master, the old man, would tell you if you asked, said Garona smoothly, but her eyes remained hard. I'm sure he would, Khadgar lied. If I had the effrontery to ask him. So I ask you instead. Whom do you represent? What powers have you been granted? Are you here to negotiate, or demand, or what? Garona closed the book. Khadgar felt a small victory in distracting her from her task, and said, "Do all humans think alike?" "It'd be boring if we did," said Khadgar. "I mean, does everyone agree about everything? Are people always agreeing to what their masters or superiors want?" said Garona. The hardness in her eyes faded just a touch. "Hardly," said Khadgar. "One reason there's so many tomes is that everyone has an opinion, and that is just the literate ones." "So understand that there are differences of opinions among the orcs as well," said Garona. "The Horde is made up of a number of clans, all with their own chieftains and war leaders. All orcs belong to a clan. Most orcs are loyal to their clan and their chieftain." What are the clans?" asked Khadgar. "What are they called?" "Stormweaver is one," said the half-orc. "Black Rock, Twilight's Hammer, Bleeding Hollow. Those are the major ones." "Sounds like a warlike bunch," said Khadgar. "The homeland of the orc peoples is a harsh place," said Garona, "and only the strongest and best organized survive. They are no more than what their lands have made them." Khadgar thought of the blasted red-skied land he had seen in the vision. Was this the orcs' homeland, then? Some wasteland in another dimension? Yet how did they get here? Instead, he said, "So, what is your clan?" Garona gave a snort that sounded like a bulldog sneezing. "I have no clan." "You said all of your people belonged to clans," said Khadgar. "I said all orcs," said Garona. When Khadgar looked at her blankly, she held up her hand. "Look at this. What do you see?" "Your hand," said Khadgar. "Human or orc?" "Orc," said Khadgar. It was obvious to him. Green skin, sharp yellowing nails, knuckles just a shade too large to be human. An orc would say that it's a human hand. Too slender to be really useful. Not enough muscle to hold an axe or bash a skull in properly. Too pale. Too weak. And too ugly. Garona lowered her hand and looked at the young mage. Through lowered brows, "You see the parts of me that are orcish. My orcish superiors and all other orcs see the parts of me that are human. I am both and neither, and considered an inferior being by both sides." Khadgar opened his mouth to argue, but thought twice of the matter and kept silent. His first reaction was to strike out at the orc he had found in the hall, not to see the human that was Medivh's guest. He nodded and said, "It must be difficult, then, without a clan allegiance." "I have turned that to my advantage," said Garona. "I can move between the clans more easily, a lesser creature. I am assumed to not be always looking for an advantage to my native clan. I am disliked by all, so therefore I am not biased. Some chieftains find that reassuring. Makes me a better negotiator. And before you say it, a better spy. But better to have no allegiance than conflicting ones." Khadgar thought of Medivh's own Castilian. Khadgar thought of Medivh's own castination of Kirin ties, but said, "And which clan do you represent at the moment?" Garona gave a wary, feigned smile. "If I said Gizbla the Mighty, what would you say? Or perhaps I'm on a mission for Morgax the Grey, or Huckapeak the Bloodrender. Would that tell you enough?" "It might," said Khadgar. "It wouldn't," said Garona, "because I made all those names up just now. And the name of the faction that has sent me here would mean nothing to you either at the moment. Not at the moment. Similarly, The old man's stated friendship with King Lane means nothing to our chieftains, and the name Lothar is nothing more than a curse invoked by the human peasants we encounter. Before we can have peace, before we can even start negotiating, we have to learn more about you. Which is why you're here. Garona let out a deep sigh. Which is why I'm praying that you will leave me alone long enough so I can figure out what the old man is talking about when we have our discussions. Kagar was silent for a moment. Garona opened the volume again, leafing through the pages where she had stopped. Of course that goes both ways, Kagar said. And Garona closed the book with an exasperated breath. I mean, we need to know more about the orcs if we're going to do more than just battle them, if you're serious about peace. Garona glared at Kagar, and for a moment the young mage wondered if the half-orc was going to leap across the table and throttle him. Instead her ears perked up, and she said, "Hold on. What's that?" Kagar felt it before he heard it, a sudden change in the air, like a window had been opened elsewhere in the tower. A bit of wind stirring up the dust in the hall, a wave of warmth passing through the tower. Kagar said, "Something is..." "I heard something," Garona said. And then Kagar heard it as well. The sound of iron claws scraping against stone, and the warmth of the air increased as the hairs on his back of his neck rose. And the great beast slouched into the library. It was made of fire and shadow, its skin dark and containing the flickers of a flame within. Its wolf-like face was framed by a set of ram's horns that glowed like polished ebony. It looked biped. It walked on all fours, its long front claws scraping along the stone floors. "What is..." hissed Garona. "Demon," said Kagar in a strangled voice, raising and backing away from the table. "Your manservant said there were visions here. Ghosts. Is this one?" Garona stood up as well. Kagar wanted to explain no, that visions tend to encompass the area, entirely shifting you into a new place. But he instead just shook his head. The beast itself was perched in the doorway, stiffing the air. The creature's eyes blazed with flames. What, was the beast blind, and could it only detect by scent? Or was it detecting a new thing in the air, a spice that had not yet expensed? Kagar tried to pull the energies to his mind, but at first his heart quilled and his mind went empty. The beast continued to sniff, turning in place until it faced the pair. "Get to the high tower," said Kagar quietly. "We have to warn Medivh." Out of the corner of his eye he saw Garona nod, but her eyes did not leave the beast. A trickle of sweat dropped down her long neck. She shifted slightly to one side. The movement was enough, and everything happened at once. The beast crouched and leapt across the room. Kagar's mind cleared, and with a quick efficiency he pulled the energies into himself, raised his hand, and buried a bolt of mystic energy in the creature's chest. The energy ripped through the beast's chest and splattered out its back, sending pieces of flaming flesh in all directions, but did not deter it in the slightest. It landed on the study table, its claws digging into the hardwood, and bound again, this time for Kagar. The young mage's mind went blank for a second, but a second was all it took for the sloped-shouldered demon to close the distance between them. Something else grabbed him and yanked him out of the way. He smelled musky cinnamon and heard a deep-throated curse as he spun out of the path of the loping demon. The beast sailed through the space that, until recently, had been occupied by the apprentice, and let out a scream of its own. A long, ragged tear had appeared along the creature's left side and was oozing burning blood. Garona released Kagar from her grip, a weak human grip, but still enough to drive the air from his lungs. In her other hand, the apprentice noticed Garona held a long-bladed knife, crimson with his first strike, and Khadgar wondered where she had hit it while they were arguing. The creature landed, wheeled, and tried to make an immediate, clumsy, second assault, its iron-shod talons outstretched, its mouth and eyes blazing with flame. Khadgar ducked and came up with a heavy red volume of the lineage of Azeroth's kings. He aftered the massive tome into the creature's face and then ducked again. The beast sailed past him, landing back near the door. It let out a wrenching, choking noise and shook its ram-horn head to dislodge the weighty Grimoire. Khadgar saw that a line of burning blood etched along the creature's right side. Grona had struck a second time. "Get Medivh!" shouted Khadgar. I'll get it away from the door." "What if it wants me instead?" responded Grota, and for the first time Khadgar heard a ripple of fear in her voice. "It doesn't," said Khadgar grimly. "It kills mages." "But you... just go!" Khadgar broke to the left, and true to his fears, the demon followed him. Instead of heading toward the door, Garona broke for the right and started to climb the far bookcase. "Get Medivh!" shouted Khadgar, darting down one of the rows of books. "No time," responded Garona, still climbing. "See if you can delay it in one of the rows." Khadgar turned at the far end of the long bookshelf and turned again. The demon had already leapt over the study table and was now prowling down the row between the bookcases, between histories and geographics. In the shadow between the rows of the creature's flaming eyes and mouth stood out stark reef and acrid smoke now roiled from its wounded sides. Khadgar cleared his mind, stuffed down all his fear, and fired off a mystic bolt. A globe of fire or a shot of lightning might be more effective, but the beast was surrounded by books. The bolt smashed into the creature's face, staggering it back a pace. It growled and crept forward again. He repeated the process like a ritual. Clear the mind, fight the fear, raise a hand, and invoke the word. Another bolt splunged off the ebony horns, ricocheting upwards. The beast halted, but only for a moment. Now its maw seemed a twisted, flame-filled smile. A third time he invoked the power of the mystic bolt, but now the creature was close, and it flashed in its face, but save for illuminating its amused features, did nothing. Khadgar smelled its sour, burning flesh, and heard a deep clicking within the beast's throat. Laughter? "Get ready to run!" shouted Garona. Yeah? From somewhere to his right and above. "What are you?" started Khadgar, already backing up. "Run!" she shouted, pushing off with her feet. The half-orc had climbed the top of the bookcases and now shoved them apart, toppling the case like giant dominoes. A deep crash of thunder resounded as each bookcase toppled over its neighbor, spilling volumes and crushing everything in its path. The last bookcase smashed against the wall and splintered, the force of the impact driving it to the ground. Grona slid down from her now wobbly perch, long blade knife drawn. She tried to peer through the churning dust. "Khadgar," she said. "Here," said the apprentice, plastered against the back wall where the iron pedestals rose to support the upper stacks of the balcony above. His face was pale, even for a human. "Did we get it?" she demanded, still in a half-crouch, expecting a new assault at any moment. Khadgar pointed to the edge of what was, until seconds before, the end of the row of shelves. Now the entire floor was a ruin of shattered cases and ruined volumes. Reaching out from the tattered wreckage was a muscular, mangled arm made of dull flame and twisted shadow. Its iron claws were already red with rust, and warm blood was already pooling on the floor. Its outstretched hand was a mere foot from where Khadgar splayed himself. "Got it," said Garona, sliding the knife back into a sheath beneath her blouse. "You should have listened," said Khadgar, choking on the dust. "I should have gotten Medivh." "It would have sliced you open before I got 2 flights of stairs," said the half-orc. "And then who would be left to explain things to the old man?" Khadgar nodded, and then a thought furrowed his brow. "Did the Magus... did he hear this?" Garona nodded in agreement. "He should have come down. We made enough noise here to wake the dead." "No," said Khadgar, heading for the entrance to the library. "What if there was more than one demon?" "Come on!" Without thinking, Garona drew her knife and followed the human out of the room. They found Medivh sitting in his laboratory at the same workbench that Khadgar left him no more than an hour previous. Now the golden instrument he was working on was in twisted pieces, and an iron hammer rested at one side of the bench. Medivh started when Khadgar burst in the room, followed closely by Garona. The apprentice wondered, had he been dozing through all of this? "Master, there's a demon in the tower," blurted Khadgar. "A demon again," said Medivh, wearily, rubbing one eye with the flat of his palm. "It was a demon the first time. The last time it was an orc." "Your student is correct," said Garona. "I was in the library with him when it attacked. Large creature, bestial but cunning, made of fire and darkness, and its wounds burned and smoked." "It was probably nothing more than another vision," said Medivh, turning back to his work. He picked up the mangled piece of device and looked at it as if seeing it for the first time. "They happened here, the visions. I think Morose warned you about them." "It was not a vision, Master," said Khadgar. "It was a demon, the type you fought in Stormwood Keep. Something had gotten past the wards and attacked us." Medivh's gray brow arched in suspicion. "Something got past my wards again. Ridiculous." He closed his eyes and traced a symbol in the air. "No, nothing is amiss. None of the wards are tripped. You are here. Cook is in the kitchen, and Morose is in the hall outside the library right now." Khadgar and Garona exchanged a glance. Khadgar said, "Then you should come at once, Master." "Must I?" said Medivh. "I have other things to worry about, of this I am sure." "Come and see," said Khadgar. "We believe the beast to be dead," said Garona, "but we don't want to risk the lives of your servants on our beliefs." Medivh looked at the smashed device, shook his head, and set it down. He seemed irritated by it. "As you wish. Apprentices are not supposed to be this much trouble." By the time they reached the library, however, Morose was standing there, dustpan and broom in hand, surveying the damage. He looked up, slightly lost, as the two mages and half-orc entered. "Congratulations," said Medivh, the line of his frowns cutting deeply across his face. "I think this is a bigger mess now than when you first arrived. At least then I had shelving. Where is this supposed demon?" Khadgar walked over to where the demon's hand jutted out, but now all that remained was one of the bookcases pressed flat on the floor. Even the blood was missing. "It was here," said Garona, looking as surprised as Khadgar. "It came in and attacked us." She grasped the edge of the case, trying to pry it up, but the massive oak was too heavy for her. After she struggled for a moment, she said, "We both saw it." "You saw a vision," said Medivh sternly. "Didn't Morose warn you about this?" "Yep," confirmed Morose. "I did at that." He tapped the sides of his blinders for effect. "Master, it did attack us," said Khadgar. "We damaged it with our own spells. The emissary here wounded it twice." Grunted the magus. "More likely you overreacted when you saw it and did most of the damage yourself. These are fresh scratches on the table from the demon. It had iron claws. Or from your own mystic bolts, flung around like beads at a Stormwind street fair." Medivh shook his head. "My knife bit into something hard and leathery," said Garona. "No doubt some of the books themselves," said Medivh. "No, were there a demon, its body would still be here, unless someone cleaned it up. Morose, do you have a demon in your dustbin?" "I don't believe so," said the Castilian. "I could check." "Don't worry, but leave your tools for these two." To the younger mage and the half-orc, he said, "I expect you to get along in light of this. You two get you straighten up the library. Young Trust, you have betrayed your name, and so must make restitution. Must make resituation now. Garona would not relent. But I saw. You saw a phantom, interrupted Medivh with an abhorrent tone. His brows knitted. You saw a piece of somewhere else. It would not have harmed you. It never does. Your friend here, and he mentioned to Khadgar, tends to see demons where there are none. That worries me a bit. Perhaps you can try not to see any when you are cleaning up. Until you do, I am not to be disturbed. And with that, he was gone. Moros laid the broom and dustpan on the floor and followed him. Khadgar looked around at the debris of the room. More than just a broom would be needed here. Cases were toppled, and in a couple of places shattered entirely, and books were flung randomly about, some with their spines broken and their covers torn. Could it have been a time-lost vision? This was no illusion that attacked us, said Garona moodily. I know, said Khadgar. So why doesn't he see it? Asked the half-orc. I don't know, said the apprentice, and I worry about finding out the answer.